feature. And then you can take it away if you want, Charles. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Mathieu, and welcome everybody to International Actuaries Day 2024. International Actuaries Day marks the occasion on the 2nd of September 1895, when the actuaries first got together internationally in Brussels in Belgium, and the International Actuarial Association was formed. And since then, we mark the 2nd of September as the time when we, as a global profession, started to operate internationally. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all today for our topic, which is the AI Enhanced Actuary. And I'm delighted to be joined by two excellent world-renowned speakers. We have Dorothy from the US, Dorothy Andrews, who's a senior behavioral data scientist with the NAIC, and she'll be talking to us later about some of the challenges around bias and professionalism within the use of AI. And we will be, before Dorothy, we'll be hearing from Adam Driussi, who is the CEO of one of the world's largest data analyst organizations, Quantium, based in Australia. As Mathieu mentioned at the outset, it's appropriate that, given our topic today is AI, perhaps one of the most pressing issues facing us, not just as a profession and as a group of individuals with a particular expertise that we have, but also as a society today. AI presents incredible challenges and opportunities for all of us. But you have a chance to see how the use of AI is improving by going into Zoom, and under Show Captions, you can click on getting live captions in your own language, and please do make use of that, because it will give you, I hope, the opportunity to see captions in your own language and judge how fast this sort of technology is progressing. So our topic for today is the AI Enhanced Actuary, how we as actuaries are going to embed AI in everything that we do. And as I've said, it comes with huge challenges, but also huge opportunities. And those opportunities potentially, depending on how we rise to them, and the challenges give rise to a number of possible futures. And there was an excellent article in the Casualty Actuarial Society magazine a little while ago, authored by Jim Weiss, and I encourage you to track it down, on 4 futures for actuaries. Along the x-axis, you've got how much AI is going to change the roles that we do, in the sense of how many actuaries are going to be impacted. And then on the y-axis is the change in the types of roles that we have. And depending on your view of what's likely, and that might be impacted by what you're about to hear from Adam and Dorothy, the world could look very different. And our challenge as a profession is how not only do we respond to the opportunities and challenges of AI, but how do we help the rest of society and the world use AI to maximum benefit. And depending on whether we can really grasp those opportunities and face up to the challenges, will depend on whether we end up in one of the positive futures for actuaries, or or potentially if we fail in that obligation, we end up in one of the more negative futures. Now, we at the IAA have been facing up to this challenge for a little while now, and we've pulled together experts from around the world to look at how we as a profession are going to respond to AI. And that's a picture from the first global summit of actuaries and AI that was held in Singapore earlier this year, which we gathered about 50 experts in the field of AI. And we've tasked those people with pulling together a whole list of challenges for us, which is summarized here. It's important to note that the International Actuarial Association operates at a level where we benefit from sharing stuff internationally. We're not looking to get in the way of what's going on in individual countries or stifling innovation within individual jurisdictions. Where the international community can bring huge benefit is in sharing. So sharing around some of the key issues of professionalism and ethics. How do we develop best practice guidelines and principles for actuaries? Looking at how we educate, not just the next generation of actuaries, but actually all of us today who are struggling to grasp not only what AI has to offer, but what do we as actuaries need to learn about AI? And as part of that, how is our role changing? How are we currently using AI within actuarial work? What are the new tools that are available for us? And how do we share all of those opportunities that we've got? And that's an important issue for us, because if we grasp all of this together with the governance and the innovations that we can see coming along, then we'll be able to answer the I hope the question that's going to come up on this final slide, which is there a future for us? How are we going to face up to what's coming? I'm an optimist. I really believe that we have a great future, but I do think that is a future that has to fully embrace what AI has to offer. And I believe that actuaries with AI will replace actuaries without AI. And perhaps to champion that and to introduce our first speaker, Adam Driussi, who has been embracing AI now for some 20 years or more, having founded a world-leading organization of Quantium that does data analytics and data science and embraces the use of AI technology. He perhaps will give us some pointers about how we as actuaries can embrace the challenges that AI presents. Adam, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks for the introduction and welcome everyone. I'm just going to share my screen here. So it's 10 o'clock at night here in Australia, but hopefully you don't find my accent too hard to follow. But like Charles said, I started a business called Quantium 22 years ago with my co-founder, and just a very quick overview of who we are in case you haven't heard of us, which many of you may not have. But we're a global firm these days. We've got about 1,200 employees. So many of those are actuaries. So I actually don't know how many actuaries we employ anymore, but it would be several hundred actuaries and certainly another several hundred data scientists more broadly and engineers and so on. So we hire a broad range of very technical people, where the idea being that we then use data and AI and data science and so on to solve business problems for clients in a range of industries. So on the right-hand side of that slide, you can see some of the brands that we work with, and depending on which country you're in, some of those brands may be very familiar and some may not be, but think of them as some of the world's leading retailers, telecommunication companies, health insurers. Everyone would be familiar with Coke as a brand. You're all probably familiar with Qantas as an airline and PNG. I've tried to include a couple of global brands there, but we work across a range of industries around using data and AI to make decisions. What I thought I'd focus on in this presentation is how I'm using AI every day in my job. So I don't probably operate like a typical actuary every day anymore. I more run a company, but I'm still driving the use of AI across Quantium. I'm going to talk about how I use AI because I very much believe what Charles just said, that I think that not just actuaries, but executives more broadly. I made a comment at a conference recently where I said 30% of executives around the table today won't be around the same table in 2 years' time. And my view is that's because they will be replaced by similar executives who embrace AI more than they do. And that's how fundamentally I believe in the impact of AI on what we do every day in our jobs, both as individual actuaries and for us at Quantium as a firm. So I'll talk about how I use AI every day. So first way I use it is as a thought partner. So I use AI tools to help me ask deeper and better questions. And I realize that as a leader, it's my role to ask big questions so that then teams of other people can go about doing their work. The AI tools then help me draft great first answers, which gives me leverage of being able to kind of come up with answers quicker that I can then get other people, whether it's myself or other teams, to then go and look at in more detail for me. So it enables me to focus on refining strategy rather than thinking about the very first steps of putting together a strategy. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. I also use AI as a research assistant. So if I've got a new meeting, I would prepare for that meeting, say it was with new prospects or I didn't know the individuals, I would prepare for different personas that might be in a meeting and how I might communicate to those personas. And sometimes I will also use it to find global examples of ideas that I've got. So I might say, I want to run a marketing campaign to do X. Can you find me 10 examples of where similar companies around the world have done that to effect, and send me a link and all that sort of stuff. So again, I use that to do research that frankly would take humans a lot longer to do. We use AI as content generators. So it might be to write a speech. So if I was giving a speech here, I have to go to an event next Monday on a separate part of my role where I have to give a 1 hour presentation there. I've just gotten it to draft my speech for me, draft my presentation, might be to draft a report, could be to do anything. And so that allows me to focus on the value add component of what I do and tailoring what's being produced up front rather than draft it myself. And one of the things I say to my team is, if you don't think that the answer you're getting from an AI tool is very good, then it probably means your question is wrong, as opposed to the AI tool can't do it. And so it focuses you as an actuary and as a leader on asking better questions up front. And like I said, I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Very invested in using AI as a coach. So thinking about how we can build AI tools and so on to give feedback to people. So, you know, I've got my people leader at Quantium now. She drives home from work and she spends half an hour on the phone, not to a human, but actually to a voice-enabled AI tool where she can start scenario and talking about different scenarios of how do I handle this and so on, getting feedback in a way that integrates all of my previous feedback for her. It integrates her psychometric reports, her previous performance reviews, all that sort of stuff, her objectives, and it has a conversation with her. And it's a less threatening way. It does it in a nice empathetic tone, probably better than I do sometimes as her boss. And it just makes it less threatening where she's having a conversation with a tool actually rather than a human being. So it actually supports me a lot in how I coach the team and coach that through Quantium. It also means that if I want to coach the team, I can start coaching people I've never met by kind of building these things into tools. And the last example is as an admin assistant. I think there's lots of ways that you can use AI tools to help you remember basic things. So it might be that I walk out of a meeting and I say, remind me next time I'm talking to Charles to refer to X, and that he's got 2 children age this age and so on. And 6 months later, I might want to come back and say, listen, I'm meeting with Charles. What did I need to remember from last time? And it could just brief me. So again, I would use that as a supplement to my own EA that I have at work. So I very much have the view that the AI Enhanced Actuary isn't the future. It's already happening today. So if you're not embracing this stuff today, which I know not everyone will be, I would strongly encourage you to get curious and to do that pretty quickly. So I'll just give you some examples of what I'm talking about. So on the left-hand side of the slide here, I met with the CEO of an airline in Australasia the other week. And I asked him, I said, are you embracing AI personally in the way you do work? And he said, no, at the airline we're doing things like transforming our call center and so on, but I'm not using it in my work. So I said, all right, give me a question that's a major strategic question for you. And his question was, okay, I'm worried of what I would do is if our main competitor came into our market and started regularly flying to multiple ports in the United States. That's his big question. So, all right. So the tool I'm using here is Claude. So the prompt I wrote in Claude was, I'm the CEO of a major international airline based in Oceania. Write me a brilliant prompt to ask Claude to answer the question of what we should consider and do if our main competitor starts flying regularly to multiple ports in the United States. So rather than just ask the tool his question, I actually asked the tool to get it to write a better question. And so then on the right-hand side here, you'll now see the answer it gave me. So all of this text that's coming through now is the new question. So it expanded the basic question, said, I want to consider strategic options. I want to think about regulatory considerations. I want to think about internal changes that we should make to our marketing strategy to exploit our strengths. Give me suggestions of how we can leverage our market position, what are potential risks, and so on. So and then it said, and then please format the response in a format that I can easily share with our board of directors and executive team. So I didn't write any of that stuff on the right. I wrote the question on the left, which was simply a slightly different version of the question that the CEO had. And when I showed the CEO this question, he said, wow, that is exactly right. Like that is all the detail I would like to see, but I didn't think of putting that in my brief. So first example, it just makes me think of how often I ask teams at work to do something and I give them a brief of something that looks like on the left and on the right is actually all the things I'm meaning in my head. But if my team doesn't understand that, how are they meant to go away and answer it properly? So anyway, so the CEO, first of all, was impressed that this was the question that the AI tool came up with. So then the next step is basically I copy that answer, copy the question it suggested, and now I run that question itself in the same tool. So now on the right-hand side, I've got the question. So as I run it, that's then producing an answer. So it's gone and done a SWOT analysis talking about all the different opportunities, threats, and so on. It talks about potential short and medium-term, long-term impacts, talks about potential strategies, whether it's overseeing pricing, changing routes, different risk and mitigation strategies, the whole lot. You can see it's producing a very detailed answer there of to answer the original question, which was pretty high level. Now, what I then did is I shared that with the CEO to say, out of interest, how good do you think this answer is? Because this is an answer that was produced in seconds. You know, the whole process of going from his initial brief to this answer, the longest period there was me typing up his question. So we're talking about 5 minutes in total to get all of this detail. I then asked him to review it and tell me what he thought. And his response he wrote back to me that night was, I think it was something like, oh my God, you've just blown my mind with the power of these tools. And I need to change the way I lead as a CEO, and I need to change the way that my leadership team works. And it's that sort of response, which is why I'm very passionate about this and why I would say that all of us need to change the way we work and why I'm changing that within Quantium. So then there's lots of other simple things we could do. I could say, can you create a visualization of the route by route analysis you've conducted? So it might be that part of its answer is a certain thing, and I'm asking it to now give me a deeper dive on some of its answers. So the idea is that I would use a tool like this to just get deeper and deeper and deeper into the things that I'm interested in or the opportunities that I see. And eventually I might then give this to a human in the team to say, can you now go and take all of this kind of thinking that I'm going through and turn this into a reality? And of course, that's when we're going to blend the human skills that we've got. And I do believe that humans still have a lot to offer, because sometimes what this will produce will be incorrect, particularly when there's numbers involved. I'm very skeptical about the numbers, but it might be that 95% of what's correct there, but the 5% that's wrong is actually really important. So it's my job as a leader to spot that and to be able to work with that. But it's in the same way that, you know, our own teams will make mistakes as well. So at Quantium, I'm very keen on us kind of pushing this journey to make sure that we are an AI-powered company. And by that, I mean I want every single person thinking about how they use AI to support every single thing they do every day. So if I talk about that, the reason why we're on that journey is because I strongly believe that if we don't lead on it, then we will fall behind. So I believe that for us as a company, and I believe it for us as individuals. So Hope that applies to every actuary on the line. I really do think for us as a firm that works for external clients, AI will redefine what value means. And we have to step up with the technology. If we don't, we will suddenly look too slow, too expensive, not ambitious enough in what we do. And also, it's really important for us to attract and retain talent. Great talent in this AI space want to work with the best tools and want to feel like they are learning and developing quicker than they would somewhere else. So it's really important for us on that journey. So how we've started that process? Well, I'm absolutely role modeling it as CEO. So in every meeting that I'm in and every interaction that anyone in the team has, they see that I am genuinely using these tools in everything I do. So if somebody's telling me something, I review their work through AI. I ask them what prompts they've run. I use prompts to run it. I've had external firms come in and pitch creative ideas to me that I've said, listen, I've just run it myself in AI and I'm challenging you as to whether what you're producing is as good as that. And I try not to do that in a rude way, obviously, but everyone I'm working with sees that I'm using AI in everything that we're doing. We're recording every meeting we have. We're having all our notes taken in AI. We're trying to improve the way we run everything. We're providing the team with tools. Now, obviously, we have to go through a process to do that, but we're rolling out Claude to all of our staff so everybody has access to tools. And equally, there'll be other tools that we make available to specialist staff. We want our engineers to be able to code with whatever the cutting edge tools are. We're running comprehensive learning and development programs across the company. So, and that's been really popular because our team are actually really energized by the idea that we're investing in them in the latest tools. So it makes them kind of cutting edge themselves. Obviously, we're providing the tools with the team with guardrails so that we don't make mistakes around risk, running things like hackathons and all that sort of stuff, again, to generate ideas across the company. And where we're headed on the journey, the whole L&D space is just going to be continuous because this is very fast moving. My vision is that we will have an app store where we build kind of applications across Quantium using AI that all of the company can share. So as I build something that maybe it's a great way to coach staff members, that we share that and anyone in the team can then access that and use it to make better coaching conversations in their team. And I really want to make sure we regularly celebrate what we're doing in AI and we measure the impact of all of these things we're doing. Within our business, at the moment, I'm talking how we use AI as individual executives, but my firm, what we do is we actually do kind of large-scale AI implementations for clients. So 3 quick examples on that front. On the telco front, we've done a lot of work with Australia's largest bank and Australia's largest telco company to bring their data together to use AI to identify scam transactions and prevent them to go out the door. So in very simple terms, in the bank data, if we see a transaction that's to go out to a new account that the customer's never transacted with it before, and if at the same time we see that person, when they made that transaction, was on the phone to a phone number they've never called before, it was a 40-minute call overseas, we would likely flag that to say, you might want to check to see if this is a scam. And so that has been rolled out to that bank. On the health side, this is some work we're doing with Discovery Health in South Africa around using AI tools to develop personalized health recommendations to clients. So this is now trying to give individual customers a nudge to incentivize healthy lifestyles so that they make the changes they make before they actually suffer ill health, hopefully reducing the burden on the health system, and in the case of Discovery, reducing the impact of claims for them. And then in retail, we do a lot of work in retail, but this is a simple example where people who run an individual grocery store out the back, they actually get AI tools to say, of all the different things you can do today in the store, here's the top 5 things that you could do today that will impact customers. And that will vary by store, and all the different managers have access to tools to do that. So just in wrapping up, I would say as actuaries, we are very familiar with the idea of continual learning. And I think AI is no different to that. There is nothing that will replace theory rather than just rolling up your sleeves and having a crack. So I would encourage you to embrace AI to supercharge the way you do your work every day. Best way you can do that is subscribe to a tool. We're using Claude, but it could be any tool. And I would use it in the ways I talked about, whether it's a thought partner, a research assistant, content generator. Really think about how can you use it to support you in every single thing that you do. I think you can find practical applications, again, rather than, don't go and study machine learning. I mean, do that as well, but really think about how you can do this in practice. I would encourage you to collaborate. So I've got all of our teams that we're collaborating with each other. And I think we all learn from seeing what other people are doing. And that's been great. And then finally, I would just say role model in your organization. So if you're on this call, you probably have the ability to impact other people, and just get involved, personally lean in as to what can be done, and challenge other people in your organization to do the same. Otherwise, thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adam. That was excellent. We will save questions to the end. I hope you'll bear with us. Keep sending questions through on the chat using the Q&A button, please, and we will collate and go through as many questions as we can at the end. But Adam, that was both a thought-provoking and an excellent start to our session today. I'm minded, I think it was Spider-Man who had the who made the comment about with great power comes great responsibility. Well, you've demonstrated the great power that AI is potentially giving us. I'm going to now let Dorothy talk about the responsibility that we as actuaries have got in using these tools that are as powerful as they are. So, Dorothy, this is where your great expertise in understanding behavioural issues and bias and professionalism comes to its fore. So, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today about some of the kinds of biases that creep into the modeling process. This is a really extensive topic and has been and continues to be a subject of a lot of debate and research. My presentation will examine three main sources of algorithmic bias and then examine some use cases to show how to identify them. So in preparation for this presentation, I researched many definitions of bias that can be found on the internet. Many of these definitions ascribe negative connotations to the word bias, which is unfortunate because, as we will discuss, biases are important to cognitive well-being. But to give you a flavor for what I found, the word bias was associated with distortions of the truth, lending support or opposition in an unfair way, closed-mindedness and prejudice, systematic error, a misstep in thinking, assessing, recollection, or cognitive or other cognitive processes, influence toward prejudice and partiality that prevents objective consideration of an issue. The notion that bias prevents objectivity is puzzling to me because objectivity is defined as freedom from bias. So I question whether objectivity can even be defined without bias, but that's a completely different webinar. This definition is based in psychology and recognizes that bias can have both positive and harmful effects. A mom who thinks her newborn is the most beautiful baby in the world is certainly biased, but her bias is not harmful. Calvin Lay, assistant professor of psychology and brain sciences at Washington University, says that although the bias we hear about in the news is usually harmful, bias itself is not always negative. He says that the way psychological scientists define bias is just as a tendency to respond one way compared to another way when making some kind of life choice. Sometimes these biases can be completely neutral, like a bias for Coke over Pepsi, and can even be helpful in allowing you to make decisions more rapidly. We'll discuss helpful aspects of bias shortly. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology uses the iceberg as a metaphor for talking about bias. And they have three categories of bias: statistical, human, and systemic. Using the iceberg to represent these three categories has two meanings. The obvious one relates to visibility, and the second relates to the difficulty of mitigating them. Most people think statistics is hard, but in respect of bias, Statistical bias is the easiest type to see and the easiest type to resolve relative to the other two. Human biases are just below the waterline and are more difficult to resolve than statistical biases. My mother used to say, you can't change people, they have to change themselves. And that is the challenge with human biases. People have to recognize their biases and actively work to change them. Finally, there is systemic bias. Systemic biases are so deeply ingrained in our institutions and society that it would take Herculean efforts to eradicate them. History books are a good example here because not every group is equally and accurately represented in history books used in different school systems. So in all the work that I've done in examining bias, it's become pretty clear to me that bias in data is the result of human activity. Whether the bias is statistical, historical, or systemic, or algorithmic, the bias observed in input data or outcome data can be tracked back to human activity. Cognition is the source. However, as will be discussed, not all bias is bad. In fact, many are helpful to our existence as human beings. So this is the Cognitive Bias Codex, and it's a very useful tool for examining all the biases that are known to date. The biases are arranged in a circle and divided into 4 quadrants. Each quadrant is dedicated to a specific group of biases. You can find an interactive version of the codex on the internet, which I strongly encourage you to do. We're going to broadly discuss the 4 quadrants. The first group of biases help us determine how much we should remember. We can only afford to keep around the bits of information that are most likely to prove useful to us in the future. We need to make constant bets and trade-offs around what we try to remember and what we forget. For example, we prefer generalizations over specifics because generalizations take up less space. Our minds pick out bits and pieces of information that are important to remember, and we discard the rest. The second group represents biases we employ when there's too much information. Biases in this category help us filter the amount of information we're constantly bombarded with on a daily basis. There are simple tricks to help us pick out those bits and pieces of information that are most likely to be useful to us in some way. Confirmation bias is a good example of this. The third group represents biases we employ when there is not enough meaning in information. Biases in this category help us by filling in the blanks in information with stuff we already know to update our mental models of the world. Just think of the old style comic strips. They used to have the gutters between frames. They act as invisible messengers within comics in that they pass information but are simply empty spaces. Our minds fill in the rest. Unfortunately, sometimes when there are gaps in information, we can fill in gaps with harmful prejudices. And sometimes even when data sets, when we have missing information, we use imputation methods to fill in that missing data. And that also represents a bias. The last group are biases that we employ when we need to act fast. As humans, we're constrained by time and information, and yet we can't let that paralyze us. Without the ability to act fast in the face of uncertainty, we surely would have perished as a species long ago. So when we look for sources of bias, there are lots of places to look. In the organization, within its business policies and practices, in the statement of the problem and measures reflected in the algorithm. In the data, there are lots of biases there, as we'll discuss later. In the model, I often say the model is the innocent bystander because it's based on math, right? And math is always right. Well, no, math can be wrong for the problem, and the algorithm is the tool that amplifies the bias in the data. Finally, the model may not be implemented as intended. This can easily happen when there is little human oversight or uninformed supervision of the model. So when we talk about biases to be on the lookout for, we have the statistical group. This first group, decisions and modeling processes, involves data. We can see that when we talk about bias, like one of the first definitions a student in statistics learns is that of an unbiased estimator. An estimator, represented by the E symbol, is said to be unbiased if it can be mathematically demonstrated to equal its true value in the population. This is the same definition in the spirit adopted by the International Organization for Standardization, which defines bias as the degree to which a reference value deviates from the truth. When the deviation is zero, there is no bias by this definition. However, it is important to remember that statistical bias is a quantitative calculation. It is not a qualitative investigation. Even if bias by this definition is zero, models can still pose other harmful biases. Confirmation bias, well, I think this graphic really does capture the meaning of confirmation bias. This bias occurs when we only consider facts that intersect with our beliefs, and it shows up in the modeling process. And when we go on to groupthink bias, I think this is probably one of the more dangerous biases because, if people are not free to express themselves, or if they're in an environment that doesn't encourage speaking up, even if your opinions differ, then you can go along with an idea that could be very harmful. The American writer Walter Lippmann says that when we all think the same way, we're not really thinking. So this groupthink bias, it can affect the outcomes of machine learning models where there's a lack of diversity among the modelers. It's very easy to fail to consider rival explanations of phenomena that might be a better solution. And diversity here doesn't only mean race. I mean, we're talking about a cross-discipline approach. This means including legal, compliance, actuarial, underwriting, data scientists, and risk management, to name a few. Often social scientists are not included, and they should be, because they understand what's going on in communities, because they study communities and how they're impacted by problems and solutions. It's also important to include communities in solution development to foster a successful implementation. So I like to say inclusion really does matter. And finally, we have deployment. So there are a couple of things that can be done to mitigate deployment bias. First, monitoring can help spot anomalous and undesired effects of an algorithm. These sophisticated tools are often put in the hands of people who don't understand what's behind the curtain and who don't have the power to override the results. Virginia Eubanks in Automating Inequality does a great job of discussing how algorithms in untrained hand causes harm. Second, human supervision of the human deployment of the algorithm is necessary. Often the human agents will not deploy the algorithm as intended, and as a result, introduce bias in the outcomes. So let's look at some use cases that show how these human biases resulted in some severe consequences for human beings. Well, this particular algorithm was designed to help hospitals and insurance companies identify which patients would benefit from high-risk care management programs, which provide chronically ill people with access to specially trained nursing staff and allocate extra primary care visits for closer monitoring. By singling out sicker people for more organized and specific attention, These programs, aim to preemptively stave off serious complications, reducing costs, and increasing patient satisfaction. However, what the model used for patients' healthcare spending, it used patients' healthcare spending as a proxy for medical need, as a benchmark. This was a poor proxy because access to healthcare in communities of color versus white communities is not equitable. The researchers found that even when spending is the same, there was not the same level of need. Patients of color tended to pay more for active interventions, such as emergency visits for diabetes and hypertension. And so the metrics that you use to define your target variable really are important, and they are also need a socio-technical approach to make sure that they are well understood. So, and I really do talk about the Amazon example a lot because it's very, very instructive on what can go wrong when you don't pay attention to your data. In 2014, a team of engineers at Amazon began working on a project to automate hiring at their company. Their task was simple: build an algorithm that could review resumes and determine which applicants Amazon should hire. Well, the project was canned just a year later because it became clear the tool systematically discriminated against women applying for technical jobs, such as social engineering positions. The tool disadvantaged candidates who went to certain women's colleges, presumably not attended by many of Amazon's existing engineers, who were mostly men. It downgraded resumes that included the word women, as in women's rugby team, and it privileged resumes with the kinds of verbs that men tend to use, like executed and captured. Words such as offered, provided, served, assisted, collaborated were more prevalently found on women's resumes and less on men's resumes. And, men were hired more than women. Well, I came across a website called theladders.com, and it posted a study that examined words that men versus women use in resumes in various industries like financial services, IT, management consulting, and retail. And what they found for financial services was that men tended to use words like equity, portfolio, investment, capital, analyst, finance, market, stock, etc., whereas women use words such as organize, event, volunteer, assistant, social, student, marketing, community development, plan. So you can see how using words that are gendered male versus gendered female can impact how an algorithm decides who is female and who is male in screening resumes. So, I have Fitbit devices, and I was really kind of disappointed when I learned about green light technology. It seems like just about everyone has some kind of tracker that uses an optical sensors that, these things they continuously monitor, like the volume of your blood. In between beats, there's less blood volume at your wrist, and therefore more light is reflected back to the sensor. Blood, due to its color, readily absorbs green light, and when the volume of blood is the greatest, the higher the green light absorption, and thus heart rate can be measured. Well, darker skin slows down the absorption rate, so a higher current is required to get a more accurate reading. Skin with more melanin blocks green light, making it harder to get an accurate reading. So, you have Fitbits, you have Samsung watches and other brands that rely on green lights. And these lights are simpler and cheaper to use than infrared lights that power like hospital-grade heart rate trackers. Green lights have shorter wavelengths and are more readily absorbed by melanin. So these trackers don't always match the readings taken the old-fashioned way by putting, your 2 fingers on a wrist. And the darker the skin, the stronger the current that must be to get a really good reading. So these types of errors in devices, we have found, and researchers have found, are really a direct result of non-representative training data. So what is in your training data influences what types of algorithmic outcomes you're going to see. So I always like to talk about the modeler's Hippocratic Oath because it sort of helps us remember that, we are relying on machines to do a lot of work, and there's not that a lot of, we shouldn't give them too much magical powers. And, we have Emmanuel Dermot, he authored the Goldman Sachs paper on model risk. And Paul Wilmot, he's a well-known mathematician and financial consultant who specializes in derivatives and risk management and quantitative finance. And the two authored the Financial Modelers Manifesto, as well as the Hippocratic Oath. And they both wrote them in response to the financial crisis, the US financial crisis of 2007 to 2010. And just a couple of quotes from them. Emmanuel Dermot said, there are always implicit assumptions behind a model and its solution method. But human beings have limited foresight and great imagination, so that inevitably a model will be used in ways its creator never intended. This is especially true in trading environments, but it's also a matter of principle. You cannot just foresee everything. So even a correct model, correctly solved, can lead to problems. The more complex the model, the greater this possibility. Paul Wilmot said that, unfortunately, as the mathematics of finance reaches higher levels, so the level of common sense seems to drop. There has been some well-publicized cases of large losses sustained by companies because of their lack of understanding of financial instruments. It is clear that a major rethink in modeling is desperately required if the world is to avoid a math-led market meltdown. Even though they were talking about the financial crisis, I still think we have these same issues emerging as we develop AI, and we need to remind ourselves of that oath all the time. And so there are some lessons for AI modeling, namely that diversity and inclusion, these things are vital to building good, responsible, and ethical AI. Representativeness is needed in the modeling data and on modeling team. Just because you have a large data set doesn't mean that you're going to have a good diversity and algorithmic fairness. And algorithms can discriminate without explicit protected class data. And so, whatever is in your data is going to get mirrored in your outcome. And I, as a doctor of psychology, I cannot stress the socio-technical approach to examining your data and understanding its root causes and how that is useful for mitigating bias. And as the famous Dr. George Bach, statistician, said, all models are wrong and some are very useful. So we have to keep thinking about keeping the human at the center of AI development. And I hope that is useful to most of you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dorothy. So two very, very different presentations. And I hope you found them, as I did, both interesting and deeply insightful. So thank you, Adam and Dorothy. I'm going to use host's prerogative to ask a couple of questions whilst Mathieu gathers the ones that you've been sending through. If you've got questions, please do send them through on the Q&A, and Mathieu will gather them and send them through. But whilst he's doing that, Could I just ask each of you just one question? So, Adam, where do you think your clients are at on the AI journey that we're all on at the moment?
It's a good question, Charles. I think it depends on who within the client. Obviously, the client can mean a lot of things, but I'll tell you the conversation that I have with CEOs of organisations that we deal with. So I tend to try and have those conversations. They pretty much all go the same way, which is I ask them if they're using AI, and then they say something like, yes, we are using AI in the business, and they can tell me the use cases. And depending on how much they're embracing AI, there might be quite a lot of use cases, or it might be something like, oh, yes, we're using Gen AI to optimize our call center approaches, or we're using Gen AI to make it easier for our staff to be able to look up policies or whatever it might be. And so often I think companies are talking about how they're using AI on a use case, whereas I actually say, how are you using it to change the way that everybody works? And again, I think the easy default answer that some companies fall into is that they have a global tech partnership with someone like Microsoft or someone like Google, and they say, oh yeah, we've got Microsoft, and so we're rolling Copilot out to our teams. And I apologize to anyone who's associated with Microsoft, but Copilot is not a very good AI tool compared to some other AI tools out there. So, I try and challenge leaders to say, well, how are you actually changing the way you operate as an exec, and how are you changing the way that the people in your organization work? Because you may not think you need to today, but in 5 years' time, you will look back and think, how did we ever work the way that we did? That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. And Dorothy, you've talked a lot about bias in our models and the challenges that it's presented. When it comes to ever more powerful AI, what do you think are the challenges and around the governance of that, so that it is appropriately and adequately governed?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is people understanding what the black box is doing, and this idea of trying to make the black box a little bit more transparent. I like to say, if you can take the black box and transform it into a glass box, then it would be much easier for people to actually understand what's going on. Short of that, we have to get back to understanding what are the impacts on real people, what kind of data is being utilized, because and what kinds of critical thinking skills might be being lost by just relying so heavily on AI. As regulators, they really want to understand who is being harmed by AI. And in order to understand that, you're going to need data that allows you to identify those segments of the population that are being harmed. Right now, we don't have a lot of data that says, okay, how do we identify, if it's an insurance product, for example, they don't collect data on certain protected class characteristics. How do we start collecting that data so that we can sort of append those characteristics to model outcomes, and then do a better job of analyzing who is going to be hurt? So we have some tools, inference tools that can infer race, but some of the other protected classes, and we do not understand gender, but some of the other ones like disability status, someone's personal lifestyle status, a lot of those protected classes we don't have available to us. So that's going to be a really big problem. And then I think also defining what does it mean to be harmed by an algorithm. We have to be able to quantify exactly what that means. What types of harm, like the EUA Act, they have a model that shows acceptable risk and unacceptable, minimum, medium, high, unacceptable. And I think we need something like that more globally. So I think those would be some of the issues that I think we're struggling with.
Great. Thanks, Dorothy. Mathieu, hopefully you've had a chance to look through all of the questions that have come through. Please do select from the questions that have come and fire some more at our presenters here today.
Yes, thank you, Charles. There's, of course, too many for us to answer all of them, but I'm going to try to condense a few of those in one question. There's a lot of discussions about the trust behind the AI and how you use it with Adam, with your clients. Dorothy, you could as well talk about like the overall using of AI is sometimes linked to cheating. For example, a lot of our students are told don't use AI because you're going to be cheating and you're going to be downgraded in some of these things. So it's all about the trust around it. How do you address this question?
Okay, Adam first.
Sure. There's several questions there. So let me just quickly share my screen and I'll give you a way to start answering those questions. So while I was just sitting there, for example, I just wrote a prompt, just giving the AI tool a prompt to say, I've just presented at this conference what I presented on, and I'm going to tell you the questions that the audience have been asking and their answers. So I'm just sharing that so that you can see, for example, the depth of some of the answers that come up with. So I'll jump to one of the questions you talked about there. You talked about, let me skip to the right one. There you go. Professors discourage students from using AI as cheating, blah, blah, blah. So there's the question. Now here's the depth of the answer that the AI tool has gone into. So, I mean, I can answer your question or I can show you how I would use AI to answer your question, because that is true to how I'm role modeling in our company. Is I start by using AI to answer it, and then I look at that answer and say, where do I want to dig further to get a more in-depth answer, or where do I disagree, and so on. And so, you know, the human answer is, I've got a 21-year-old studying fourth-year engineering, and I think it's a little bit simple to say that professors look at it and say it's cheating if you're using AI to use your answers. For example, he's learning how to code using Copilot tools. So I'm saying to our team at work, our engineers at work, if we don't have these tools available when these graduates join us to start working next year, they're going to suddenly rock up and say, hold on, I've learned to code at university with Copilot tools. Are you telling me I don't have those tools available to use here? Because that is the way we will all be working going forward. So the idea of not having the tools available or not educating our young students how to use these tools is akin to going back 30 years ago and not having the internet available for students. I mean, you know, in my first year at work, I lobbied to get the internet on our desks and personal email addresses. Now we would laugh about that. It's going to be the same with these tools. So the one other thing I'll quickly say is, when I've been role modeling this at work, you know, I've had a range of different responses from people in the team, and one of the responses has been from people saying, "Oh, thank you. I thought I was cheating by using these tools to supplement me in what I was doing," all the way through to people saying, "I'm scared. I don't know what to do." But I don't believe it's cheating at all, because I still believe that there's a strong human element to reviewing the outcomes that come out and making them even better, and in writing great questions in first place, I should say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Dorothy.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because, you know, I actually teach at the university, and, you know, first of all, I actually encourage all my students to work together on homework. You know, I don't assign a grade to it because I want that to be a very enriching kind of environment for them, and have the opportunity to actually verbalize what they understand to each other, because I think that reinforces concepts. Now, using AI, you know, I don't think, I mean, we all use it, right? I mean, you go to Google, you do searches, I mean, you do research. I mean, lots of us use it. So I don't think of it as cheating. I think of it as actually being a tool that can be helpful to people. However, there has to be some way of measuring true understanding. It can't just be all, you know, AI assisted understanding. And so I think we have to find ways to truly test real understanding, whether you've used AI to help you develop, you know, a presentation, or you turn to AI to do research. You still have to come up with novel ways of understanding. I often think about like Plato and Socrates, who thought well, you know, as humans, we should not be writing anything down because they thought it would cause us to not be able to use our brains to memorize. And I often think to remember things. And I often think, I wonder what they would think about Gen AI today. So I just think if you are interested in true understanding, you have to come up with clever ways to actually measure true understanding as opposed to saying don't use the tool. But I mean, as personally, I mean, I think people should, I still believe, you know, doing research from the ground up is an important way to acquire knowledge.
Great, thank you, Dorothy. I'm going to give us, we've had so much interest in this. I'm going to give us time for one more question each before I will then have to, I'm sorry, wrap it up. But Adam's already pointed you to how you can get your questions answered elsewhere. So Mathieu, one more question, either to both panelists or one for each before we wrap up for today.
Yeah, I do have to admit I've never had a panelist already answer the questions on AI before, so I'm a little bit needed to cherry pick now one that maybe the AI would not have handled correctly. And so I'm going to put a spin on one question that was asked. It's more about the classic computers have always been rule based, right? So that's a question that was there. And now is there a question that AI, especially Gen AI, may be able to bend those rules or take them to a different direction that may not necessarily be where it was anchored, and what is the risk in our business operations if we use some of those models that are maybe dishinged from the initial rules-based system?
Well, I can say that this actually did come up recently in a real life problem that I was working on with some folks, and the one consideration was, is a rule-based system really considered AI? And, you know, they were hoping that it came up in a regulatory context, and, you know, the thought was to have those excluded from AI because sometimes rule-based systems might be preferences, you might make a decision to say, oh, I don't want to sell insurance, you know, this type of insurance in this particular market, which really doesn't have anything to do with AI. So I think there has to be, again, if you keep things human-centered, then there is room to still have a rules-based system along with having an AI system, and to make sure those don't conflict with certain goals the organization might have.
Thanks, Dorothy. Adam, do you want to add a final word to that?
Yep, I will. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but again, I'll be disappointed if I didn't show you how easy it is to get an answer to that question. So I typed in the question, as you said, and I didn't get it exactly right. I deliberately made a spelling mistake to show you that it doesn't matter. And again, without going through all the elements of the answer, there's a lot of detail in the first draft of the answer here that Claude produced, and it is better than any first draft answer I would have come up with. Now, I would go in there and edit and nuance it a little bit, but there is more depth in this first cut answer than I could have come up with live to answer the question. So I'm just using that as an example of how AI should supplement the way you work as an individual, because I literally use it in everything I do, and I'm role modeling it in this presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you both. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. I hope you found that useful. I hope we've demonstrated to you that this is technology that we have to embrace, that the actuaries of tomorrow will absolutely be AI enhanced actuaries. And if you're not embracing it, you will be replaced by somebody who is embracing it. And alongside embracing this technology, we have to be aware of its shortcomings. We have to be aware of the biases and the challenges within the answers that were being shown. So Adam's shown you great ways of using AI to ask great questions. I'm going to absolutely take that away from today. And Dorothy's really highlighted to us how we as humans still have a really important role to play in understanding what's coming out of the models and how we use that information and how we work with others to ensure that AI is used professionally and ethically. So thank you very much for today. Thank you, Adam and Dorothy. Thank you to the executive team, to Mathieu and Christian, for arranging and organising and managing today. And thank you all for joining. I hope you found that useful. Do please continue to access the information and ideas and webinars and presentations that are coming out from the International Actuarial Association. We will be showcasing a lot more in this, but also please do take those lessons from Adam and Dorothy to heart and go away and start embracing the lessons that you learned today, the using of AI in your work and at home to the benefit